What's up guys, this is Chris with Cowdog, and today we are going to be restoring a vintage timber slick and upgrading the chisel handle from an old junker like this to something like this. So stick around and check it out. I got this old 2-inch chisel from my buddy Ryan Scanwoods on Instagram. It's a flea market find, and I'll have his site with vintage tools linked in the description below. There's a lot of options to get rid of rust. I like to use a bath of powdered citric acid and water for a couple hours to penetrate the steel and get all the crud and schmutz off. And the only caution I have is to watch out for nickel plating with citric acid, since the acid will strip the nickel plating off with overexposure. Over on the bench, I'll use this sanding drill attachment with some high grit sandpaper, starting around 320 and working my way to 1000 grit to smooth and polish everything out. I get a lot of use out of this particular sanding kit on small items, especially metal. This, along with my tools used in the video, will be linked below. To work on the back of the chisel and bevel, I've got a wet grinder, specifically a Tormek. The Tormek is great, and other wet grinding systems out there are also comparable. However, the downside to this is that it takes absolutely forever since it turns at such a slow speed. This could be more efficiently done with an 8-inch bench grinder. Unfortunately, I only own a 6-inch bench grinder, which wouldn't give me the hollow grind I need, and frankly, having 6 inches instead of 8 has always been a lifelong problem of mine. After the Tormek, I like to polish the back and hone the secondary bevel on a 3000 and 8000 grit waterstone. I use these Shapton glass backs, which are widely available and don't require full soaking to become effective. I just keep a squirt bottle handy, and if I feel too much resistance, I'll re-lubricate the stone with more water. I also start by flattening the backs, but you can start with the bevel first and do the back second. There's folks that do them either way, and they're both plenty effective. Now on the Tormek, I honed a primary bevel of 25 degrees, which means my secondary will be at 30 degrees. I typically keep these bevels consistent between my chisels and planes, aside from a couple high angle irons that I use primarily for exotics. I'm not going to go in depth into my sharpening technique here. However, if you'd like to see a more detailed video on my sharpening practice, let me know in the comments below. After the stones, I strop with leather and microabrasive green compound. I don't typically add more green compound every time, but figured I'd show it on video, and frankly, a little extra doesn't hurt. Stropping is definitely a bit of a feel game. The only suggestion I can offer is when working the bevel to not go too high and roll your edge over. At this point, you're just polishing and refining, so don't overdo it. And after all that, I'll hit the steel with some tongue butter, equal parts tongue oil and beeswax to prevent further oxidation. I use this as a second stage in my Maloof finish, and it goes great on tools as well, especially in humid climates. For the handle, I'm going with a scrap piece of ash. I've been getting into some Japanese style timber framing and joinery lately, so I want this large chisel to operate more as a proper timber slick. Therefore, I'm going with a longer handle for working on larger beams and on work surfaces that are lower than typical bench height. Since I'm crafting this handle without a lathe, really just for the challenge of it, I'll mark center on both ends and then roughly mark out the butt end. And then after getting the measurement for the opening of the chisel socket, I'll scribe that out on the opposite side. These two circles inevitably create a taper, and therefore I'll have to use my taper jig to rough shape the handle. Since this is thicker than my maximum clamping capacity, I'll use some double stick tape to hold everything in place, and you're about to see how that worked out for me. So my first pass on the first side went fine. After that, I rotated it 90 degrees to the adjacent face, and halfway through had to clench the cheeks because the tape released. As you can see, the jig kept moving, but the workpiece stopped. This could have created all sorts of calamities: kickback, concussion, asteroid collision, etc. So I shut the saw off and then retooled my situation. I imagined that there was probably too much dust on my work surfaces, which created a bonding problem for the double-sided tape, so I went with blue tape and CA glue on my second attempt and used my push stick to keep the workpiece down onto the jig. So moral of the story is make sure your surfaces are dust-free before applying adhesive tapes for work holding. Back on the bench, I secured the handle between my plane stop and a doe's foot and started working the corners with my jack plane to create a tapered octagon profile. This was nice and therapeutic at first, but it took a fair number of passes, even using thicker passes than I typically would. The basic idea here is to just work that corner closest to me on the bench, and once down to size, rotate the piece towards me a quarter turn until that octagon is completed. This would be so much easier with a draw knife. But I don't have a draw knife, And according to Instagram, draw knives are just used to remove bark for epoxy tables. Using my marking gauge, I measured the depth of the socket and then transferred that to the handle. Then, using outside and inside calipers, I got the measurement for the base of the handle's tenon before sawing at my marking line just a hair all the way around to create a ledge at the base of the tenon. Then I work everything down towards the base of the tenon with a chisel until I get to that measurement from the calipers. At the end of the tenon, I'll whittle that away with a Sloyd knife to help start the taper that will match the inside profile of the socket. And after that, it's a lot of work with rasps to get everything to ultimately fit. This is definitely one of those projects where sneaking up on the fit is recommended to ensure the chisel doesn't come off the handle until I want it to. I'll hit everything with the low angle block to finish, and then sand the butt end round to create a surface that won't split when hammered with a heavy joiner's or carver's mallet. Instead of sanding narrow parts like this and risking rolling over my edges too much, I'll hit everything with a card scraper for that finish ready surface. And then it's on to a test fit to make sure everything is kosher. Rule number 1 of finish, don't forget to kiss the homies goodnight. I'm using my often used Maloof finish, equal parts pure tongue oil from Real Milk Paint Company, wipe-on poly, and boiled linseed oil with a splash of mineral spirits. I'll apply about 5 or 6 generous coats over a few days, wiping off the excess. Then the final coat will be a little bit thicker to create some buildup, but not too thick to have runs and sags. After that's cured, I'll hit the handle with some tongue butter as well. Be sure to not get the tenon with this stuff because it could provide a bit of lubrication and affect the fit inside the chisel socket. Once again, this is a wipe on and wipe off application, and just do 1 generous coat. After all that's said and done, everything gets reassembled. Since this is going to be used on and off my bench, I wanted a leather chisel cover to protect it and enlisted my friend Mike Griffin from Wing & Wave Designs to do so. The collar of the chisel cover has some sewn-in magnets to keep it from sliding off, and we're going with some nice horween, aka horse butt. Now, I don't know much about leatherworking, but from watching Mike, who is also a woodworker, do his work, I can see how the barrier to entry on this is quite low and the process can be extremely addicting. It's primarily a lot of folding, gluing, cutting, and stitching, and honestly, some of these micro processes with leatherworking are super satisfying to watch. In my opinion, if you're a hand tool woodworker, you'll absolutely love leatherworking as well. Speaking of stitching, Mike's created this amazing stitching pony that he sells. This stitching pony has a monster clamping capacity to be able to fit on most workbenches and a number of different table surfaces, making it super versatile. It's sturdy, has a spring-loaded clamping mechanism, and the jaw design allows for secure work holding while leaving room to work and, you guessed it, stitch. I'll have Mike's info linked below in the comments. And to be frank, or Sally, or whatever, I don't have the slightest idea what this stitching technique is called, but Mike's only been leatherworking for a few months now, and honestly, he's quite masterful with this stuff already. It really goes to show that the learning curve on this is not steep at all. We used my branding iron in an arbor press to punch my logo on the surface, and Mike also stuck his logo on the back. And after one test fit, the fit is absolutely money. Then a bit of paste wax to finish adds character and protection. And that's it, folks. To be honest, I'll probably be doing most of my future tool handles on the lathe, but there was something about the idea of doing this without one that intrigued me, and I am extremely pleased with the result and glad that I did so. Tool restoration helps preserve our history and our craft, and the character of these old pieces of steel shines through in the work that we do and in the stories that we tell. This isn't something that just looks nice on a tool wall, it's highly sharp and functional, and in the work that's done with it, I'll be able to point to a storied tool that made it. And in my humble opinion, that's one of the most beautiful aspects of this journey in woodworking. Save a tool, make something beautiful, tell a story. Alright guys, that's it for me on this one. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like button, throw me a comment down below, let me know what you'd like to see on this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell for more notifications, and as always, see you next time here at Cowdog Craftworks. See on the channel, blah 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 blah. Storing a vintage timber slick. Vintage timber slick.